Have you ever been reading a novel and thought, this is missing one key ingredient? A quest for financial statements. If you've ever thought that, then this is the novel for you. Hello everyone, my name is Ricky, and today I'll be discussing Rob Roy by Sir Walter Scott, a classic adventure novel written in 1817. It's old, really old. And at the time, Sir Walter Scott was one of the world's most popular authors. Now, this book has maybe 10,000 reviews or 10,000 ratings on Goodreads, which is about the same amount a popular Star Wars book from 1997 might have. So, Sir Walter Scott's work has not exactly remained in popularity. And there is reason for that. Because it's old. It's from 1817. And if you've ever read anything from this period, you know that the language is often very circuitous and they use a lot of words we don't use anymore. So it is difficult to get into. And what makes this book even harder is all of the Scottish brogue. This takes place in Scotland and England. And so there's a lot of Scottish characters that talk in a very Scottish way. How, sir, you ken little about Scotland. It's no for want of good rivers. So it's not in want of good rivers. That's exactly how it's written in here. So it can be hard to follow. That was an easier portion, but there's a lot that's harder to follow. It really helps if you just read it in Scotty's voice from Star Trek in your head. So it's difficult to get into. It's difficult to recommend. But why recommend it at all then? Well, because it's a great story. So what's the plot? Well, it's about Frank Osbaldistone? That can't be... What? But, yeah, it's called Rob Roy, but it's about Frank Osbaldistone. And basically, he's a loser who writes poems instead of doing accounting for his banker dad. And so his dad does like a ye olde Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where he sends him to live with his uncle out somewhere else. And so his uncle kind of lives out on the boonies near Scotland. And so his son is like, this is dope. I'll just go out there and then do whatever, and it'll probably be cool because it's Scotland and that's famous. And so his dad basically has a child swap where he sends his son Frank to go live with his uncle, and his uncle sends his son Rashleigh to go work for Frank's dad, the big banker. So yada yada yada. Frank gets settled in, and he realizes this Rashleigh character is a cunning manipulator, a cunning evil mastermind. And so he finds out that Rashleigh is going to ruin his father because he hid documents. He hid the financials. SEC, where are you? And so Frank has to go out in search into the dangerous Scottish Highlands to recapture these epic financial statements to save his father. And along the way, he meets, this time he meets Rob Roy, the Robert, the Rob of the Roys. So who is Rob Roy? Well, Rob Roy is a historical figure. He's a real person. He was a thief. He's kind of like a ye olde Scottish mob boss in that, if he was good to you, he was your best friend. Now, if he was your enemy, he was your worst nightmare. So he actually ran protection gigs like they do in the mob where he had these people pay, but he was sort of a folk hero, but also a criminal. You know how it goes. There's 80 zillion dudes like this. So the book is not so much about plot, as you can tell by it being about some guy looking for financial statements in the woods. The plot is not really the main focus. The main focus is, for one, the historical element, because you get to meet Rob Roy, and you get to see what Scotland was like at the time, which I'll get into in a minute. And then the other part is it's just a good yarn. It's long and slow, but there's a lot of great dialogue. There's a lot of interesting and funny characters. It's really witty. There's a lot of great description of the landscape, the severe Scottish Highlands, the beautiful woods, the rushing rivers. So it's not for impatient readers, no doubt, but if you can kind of just go with it as a good tale and not worrying so much about the plot, where we're getting, then I think you'll really enjoy this. And it's a really fascinating historical piece because it shows. I don't live in England, I've never been to Scotland, but it kind of shows why this period is so mythologized and why kind of the Scottish Highlanders are so interesting is because basically England and like Glasgow and all these kind of more businessy city urban areas were like right next to Scotland, and at this time was just kind of the Highlands, and there were all these dudes running around with swords and like that. There's like Rob Roy, and he's a mob boss, and this stuff. So it really is kind of this interesting contrast of like this kind of urban business booming area, and then on the other side, kind of this harsh environment where there's just all these really tough guys, and they have this long history and all these feuds and the families and the clans, and so it's hard to describe, but it really I think gives the reader an insight into why this period is so interesting. In another of Scott's novels, Waverley, which was his first historical novel, he explains at the end that he wrote it because he wanted to show readers kind of this Scottish way of life and this culture that was disappearing at the time. And I feel like he captured it in that book, but also in this book, I think you get warts and all this image of kind of this way of life that was disappearing at the time. And it's really interesting to see the contrast between kind of the more business oriented, like Frank's father, and his sidekick, the Bailey, Mr. Jarvis. It's like a big accountant nerd. And so you have these people contrasted with, Rob Roy, and he's running and sneaking in the woods, and he's got a gang, and they're sword fighting, and everybody's got all kinds of crazy stuff happening, and they're drinking their ale. And so it is a hardy adventure. There's escapes, there's duels, there's tricks and all these things. But yeah, it's definitely not fast moving. But if you can stay with the slower plot and just go with it for kind of the journey of seeing the period and taking in the descriptions and getting a glimpse at all these varied characters, I think you'll really like it. And one of the best things about it is written basically the narrator telling this story of his youth to a close friend, and it really comes through in the writing, where when you're reading this book, it feels like you're sitting by the fireplace talking to your favorite uncle, regaling you with this epic yarn of when, mild-mannered Franco Baldystone ended up getting mixed up with all these historical figures. So, in conclusion, I really enjoyed this book. I think if you can get through the slowness of it, you'll really love the story and the characters. And this is a lot of newer books kind of struggle in this area, but Walter Scott is really good at tying his stories with a bow. So at the end of this, I don't know if there's any character I could say, yeah, I don't know what happened to them in the end. Like, it's all really covered. So it's a really long but very complete and slow moving, but just enjoy it. It's like a nice molasses story. Just go with it, And of course, enjoy the search for financial statements, because what's more exciting of a plot device than that?